Hello everyone. Picture this. You are stuck in a gridlocked commute, late for a crucial job interview, and you feel the familiar, suffocating rise of panic in your chest. What do you do? Most of us today might try taking a few deep breaths, perhaps unconsciously drawing on ideas that were refined over 2 millennia ago. We owe a massive debt to the philosophical evolution meticulously chronicled in Brad Inwood's definitive work, Later Stoicism, 155 BC to AD 200. This period fundamentally reshaped how human beings navigate adversity. We often think of Stoicism as a monolith, a static, rigid set of rules formulated by a few bearded men in antiquity. But here's the thing, it wasn't static at all. Between 155 BC and the 2nd century AD, this intellectual framework underwent a massive, dynamic architectural evolution. It transformed from a highly dialectical, combative defense of abstract theory into a deeply grounded, imperial pragmatism designed for the messy reality of daily life. The early thinkers were obsessed with defending every theoretical perimeter. However, as the world became more complex, moving into the expansive era of the Roman Empire, the philosophy had to adapt or die. It had to become a toolkit for survival, shifting its focus toward a therapeutic pragmatism that you could actually use when facing a tyrant, losing a fortune, or just sitting in traffic. Actually, if you look closer at this specific timeline, you realize it's the story of an idea being forged in the fires of intense public skepticism and political upheaval. Philosophy transitioned from a defensive fortress into a living, breathing guide for human resilience. The architecture of human thought is rarely built in a day. It evolves by profound necessity. What exactly sparked this massive shift from abstract theory to daily pragmatism? We have to look at the catalyst of what became a profound dialectical deadlock. Around the middle of the 2nd century BC, the Stoic school faced a devastating critique from the academic skeptic Carneades. He was a brilliant, relentless debater who systematically attacked the core Chrysipian dogmas, arguing forcefully against their theories of absolute knowledge. Imagine the most aggressive, intellectually terrifying lawyer dismantling your entire worldview on live television. That was Carneades. The leader of the Stoics at the time, Antipater, simply could not handle this intellectual onslaught in the public square. Antipater was entirely unable to match Carneades in live, face to face debate. Instead of standing his ground, he retreated. He earned a rather unflattering historical nickname, the Ink-bellower, because he hid away in his study, writing volumes upon volumes of scholarly replies to Carneades' skeptical critiques. But here's the thing, while Antipater's retreat might look like a cowardly defeat, it actually cemented a vital transformation. It forced the school into a defensive text-bound evolution. Because they couldn't just rely on quick verbal sparring anymore, they had to rigorously document, systemize, and codify their dogmas into intensive scholarly texts. This historical moment, recorded by thinkers like Plutarch and Numenius, fundamentally altered their trajectory. Actually, if you look closer, this dialectical deadlock was the best thing that could have happened to them. Without the ruthless pressure of skepticism, the system would never have evolved the robust, documented resilience that allowed it to survive the eventual fall of empires. Sometimes, a brutal intellectual defeat is the exact prerequisite for building enduring wisdom. As the school retreated into texts and deeply reassessed its purpose, a brilliant new way of visualizing their system emerged. Later Stoics, heavily influenced by the great polymath Posidonius, conceptualized their philosophy not as a sterile list of rules, but as an integrated, living animal. In this Posidonian metaphor, no single part could survive without the others. They divided their system into three distinct disciplines. First, they looked at logic, which included dialectic, epistemology, and grammar. This was the bones and sinews of the animal, providing the rigid structural support and the hard defense needed to withstand the intellectual attacks. Next came physics, the study of cosmology, theology, and the natural elements. This acted as the blood and flesh, providing the living creature with vitality, substance, and a connection to the material universe. Finally, There was ethics, the study of virtue, action, and appropriate responsibilities. This was the soul, the animating purpose that gave the entire creature its reason to breathe. But here's the thing. While the early founders of the school valued all three of these disciplines equally, a profound shift occurred. From 155 BC onward, later Stoicism gradually and deliberately shifted the organism's vital weight almost entirely toward the soul, or ethics. The bones of logic and the flesh of physics were still absolutely necessary to keep the animal alive, but their ultimate purpose was solely to serve the ethical soul. Actually, if you look closer, this is identical to how we prioritize our own health today. We don't build muscle or eat well just to be biological machines. We do it so we can engage meaningfully in our human responsibilities. The vast machinery of life only matters if the soul has a driving purpose. This brings us to the fascinating demotion of formal logic within this living philosophical animal. We move from an obsession with complex syllogisms to an intense, boots on the ground pragmatism. For the early founders, wrestling with logical paradoxes like the master argument or the liar paradox was absolutely foundational. They loved theoretical knots, but the Roman Stoics marginalized this obsessive study, viewing it as a dangerous distraction from actual moral progress. Imagine walking into a modern corporate crisis where the servers are on fire and a manager wants to pause and debate the theoretical definitions of coding syntax. That is exactly how these later thinkers viewed pure logicians. There is a precise hierarchy to their new pragmatism. First comes mastering your desires and actions, learning to tame the wild passions that ruin our lives. Second comes application, which means actually fulfilling your duties and appropriate responsibilities to your family and society. Only in third place do they put logical proof, which is merely there to secure the doctrines from skeptical attacks. Epictetus perfectly encapsulated this shifting priority with a brilliant, biting warning. He said, "The ship is sinking, and you come to me wanting to raise the topsails." But here's the thing, they didn't hate logic inherently. They just realized that being able to solve a complex word puzzle does absolutely nothing for you when you are facing grief, bankruptcy, or exile. Actually, if you look closer at this shift, it is a desperate plea for relevance. If your philosophical framework cannot help a person survive the sinking ship of a tragic human life, then your sophisticated logical proofs are entirely worthless. True intelligence is knowing exactly when to stop arguing and start bailing water. If logic was demoted, what happened to the study of the natural world? In the architecture of divine reason, physics was not mere science. It was transformed into a profound psychological mechanism for achieving moral perspective. The later Stoics didn't study the cosmos just to map the stars. They studied it to shrink the human ego. They mapped out the concentric spheres of the universe, Earth at the center, surrounded by water, air, and the fiery ether. They wanted the human mind to contemplate this unified, indestructible cosmic system. Seneca articulated this brilliantly when looking at the bloody, chaotic history of human warfare. He said, "This is the little dot that gets carved up by fire and sword. The mind cannot spurn human affairs until it has toured the entire cosmos." Imagine stepping out of a stressful board meeting where people are shouting over profit margins and suddenly looking at a high resolution image of the Milky Way galaxy. That instant evaporation of your anxiety is exactly the therapeutic mechanism they engineered. But here's the thing, understanding the physical architecture of the universe was a prerequisite for ethical stability. By zooming out to the edge of the aether, you realize that your commute, your bad boss, and even your political revolutions are happening on a microscopic speck of dust. Actually, if you look closer, this is an incredibly advanced psychological intervention. Physics becomes a tool to cure human arrogance. You learn how the elements seamlessly cycle and how divine reason structures the cosmos to fundamentally calm your nervous system. You cannot be consumed by petty terrestrial anxieties once you truly comprehend the magnificent rational machinery of the universe. This cosmic perspective was dramatically refined by the Posidonian paradigm shift. Posidonius fundamentally revolutionized Middle Stoicism by orchestrating a brilliant empirical synthesis. He married the highly abstract theoretical dogma of Chrysippus with rigorous hands-on empirical observation and mathematical geography. He wasn't just an armchair philosopher. He was a scientist mapping the physical world to prove philosophical concepts. He looked at the globe and divided it into 5 ethnic zones, examining how the extreme cold of the Scythian zones or the intense heat of the Ethiopian extremes directly correlated with the resilient or passionate characteristics of the people living there. He championed the concept of sympathia, the universal sympathy and interconnectedness of all matter. He proved this by blending mathematical precision with philosophical inquiry, deploying analogical reasoning to explain actual physical phenomena. He measured tidal bulges to understand the moon's influence on the ocean, and he worked to estimate the sun's exact size. He offered causal explanations for terrifying natural events like earthquakes, volcanoes, and meteorology. But here's the thing, he didn't do this just to write an ancient geography textbook. He did it to prove that the universe is a fully integrated, rational organism where every single part affects every other part. Actually, if you look closer at Posidonius' work, it is the ancient equivalent of modern systems theory. If the moon can physically pull the vast oceans of the earth, then clearly all elements of the cosmos are bound together by an invisible rational tension. By observing the empirical realities of warm and cold zones, he grounded the abstract theory of a unified cosmos into hard, observable data. He proved that philosophy and hard science are just two languages describing the exact same rational reality. With the physical universe rigorously mapped out, Middle Stoics turned their analytical gaze inward, fundamentally altering their psychology and their concept of the hegemonikon, the commanding faculty of the mind. Early Stoics, led by Chrysippus, believed in a strictly unitary rational soul. To Chrysippus, emotions weren't biological drives, they were merely cognitive errors. If you were angry, you were just doing bad mental math. But Carneades and Posidonius completely fractured this unitary model. They introduced a dualistic struggle, acknowledging a fierce battle between pure reason and our innate irrational appetites. They recognized the duplex vis animorum, the twofold force of the mind. But here's the thing, this was a massive concession to reality. Imagine knowing logically that you need to go to the gym, but your body screams at you to stay on the couch and eat sugar. Early thinkers would say you just have a false belief about the value of sugar. Panaetius and Posidonius admitted the truth. Logical instruction alone absolutely cannot cure passion. They acknowledge that the motions of the mind contain deeply rooted, innate, irrational biological drives that must be actively tamed, not just logically refuted. Actually, if you look closer, they anticipated modern evolutionary psychology by 2 millennia. We are not perfectly rational computers. We are biological creatures carrying the evolutionary baggage of raw appetite and spirit. Reason has to sit on top of this fractured, volatile foundation and constantly wrestle it into submission. This dualistic model made their system infinitely more practical and therapeutic. Because once you admit that the irrational drives are innate, you stop just arguing with your passions and you start actively building daily habits to tame them. You begin the hard work of managing your humanity. Having established how fractured and messy the human mind is, they needed a robust framework to manage it. This brings us to ethics and the specific anatomy of the honorable, or kalon. The pursuit of the honorable was fractured into 4 distinct cardinal virtues. However, rather than leaving these as abstract ideals, they grounded each one deeply in a distinct biological facet of human nature. Wisdom, encompassing both the theoretical and the practical, stems directly from our innate human instinct to discover the truth. Courage, which is defined as despising merely human affairs and external threats, grows from our biological instinct to lead and achieve greatness. Justice, the foundation of fellowship and community, is rooted in our natural instinct for society and shared reason. Finally, self control, the practice of modesty and decorum, arises from our instinct for order and beauty. All four of these biologically rooted virtues flow outward from a single glowing core, living according to nature. But here's the thing, they didn't view these virtues as guarantees of external success. They used a profound analogy of an archer. The ultimate goal of the archer is doing absolutely everything in their power, using wisdom, courage, justice, and self control to take the perfect shot. Whether the arrow actually hits the mark is subject to the wind, the target moving, and external fortune. Actually, if you look closer, this is the ultimate antidote to modern outcome anxiety. You are only responsible for the anatomy of your own honorable actions, for aligning your biological instincts with rational virtues. The final external outcome is completely out of your hands. By grounding ethics in biology, they made virtue not a lofty, impossible standard, but the most natural, healthy expression of what a human being biologically is. This biological and practical grounding reaches its absolute zenith in the Therapeutics of Seneca. Seneca explicitly positioned his philosophy not as some dry academic pursuit of the liberal arts, but as a vital, life saving medical therapy for the corrupted human soul. He drew a sharp, unyielding line between geometry or grammar and true philosophical action. The liberal arts might calculate the dimensions of the cosmos or analyze the syntax of words, but therapeutic philosophy investigates the divine craftsman and actively achieves virtue. For Seneca, the world is bleeding, poisoned by public errors and false opinions. The philosopher's job is to blast a laser of philosophical precept right through that dense red cloud of societal delusion to heal the individual. He brilliantly compared the wise man to a doctor. He wrote, a man whose ship is taking on water doesn't get angry. He plugs the leaks. The wise man views wrongdoers as a doctor views patients. But here's the thing, this changes everything about how we interact with toxic people in our daily commute or our digital networks. When someone insults you, they are not your enemy. They are deeply psychologically sick. Actually, if you look closer, Seneca is offering a profound emotional shield. You don't get furious at a patient vomiting in an emergency room. You treat them. Seneca turned philosophy into a trauma ward for the mind. We are all taking on water from false societal opinions about wealth, fame, and status. Healing is the act of furiously plugging those leaks with rational precepts. It is not an intellectual luxury. It is the critical medicine required to survive the sickness of the human condition without losing your own compassion. If Seneca provided the medicine, Epictetus provided the precise surgical mechanism of how our minds actually get sick, revealing the mechanical sequence of assent. Epictetus taught that absolutely all human action, from picking out your groceries to the catastrophic fall of Troy, is driven mechanically by our cognitive assent to external impressions. He breaks it down into a mercilessly precise sequence. First, an event occurs. Instantly, an impression or fantasia strikes our mind. Next, we automatically apply our preconceptions to it. Then comes the critical juncture. Reason assesses the impression and votes yes or no. Only after this mechanical sequence does action or passion result. Epictetus looked at the raging, burning ruins of Troy and made a staggering claim. He said the Iliad is nothing more than impression and the use of impressions. Paris's catastrophic downfall was not the physical sack of Troy by the Greeks, but the internal destruction of his own reliable character the moment he said yes to the impression that he should steal another man's wife. But here's the thing, this mechanism gives you absolute, terrifying responsibilities for your own life. You cannot blame the event. You cannot blame the initial flashing impression. Actually, if you look closer at this mechanism, it is the ultimate source of human freedom. Between the external event and your emotional reaction, there is a microsecond where reason assesses. By mastering the mechanism of assent, you become bulletproof. No boss, no economic crash, and no invading army can force you to feel passion or commit action without your conscious assessment. You are solely responsible for protecting the citadel of your own reliable character against the daily bombardment of external impressions. When you master this internal mechanism, your external perspective expands dramatically, leading to the grand vision of the imperial cosmopolis. It was the emperor Marcus Aurelius who fully crystallized the realization that human rationality inherently binds all mankind into a single cosmic political community. He saw three overlapping rings of existence. In the center is the individual mind, the inner daimon. Surrounding that is the local republic Athens, Rome, or whatever city issues your passport. But enveloping everything is the blinding, radiant gold of the Cosmopolis, the universal city shared by both gods and humans. Marcus Aurelius forged an unbreakable chain of logic to prove this. If intelligence is shared by us, then reason is shared. If reason is shared, then the law that dictates what to do and not do is shared. If law is shared, we are fellow citizens. Therefore, the cosmos itself is a sort of city. But here's the thing: coming from the most powerful man on earth, the commander of the Roman legions, this is a staggering declaration of radical equality. It means the enslaved person pouring wine and the emperor wearing the purple are literal compatriots in the exact same cosmic municipality. Actually, if you look closer, this entirely dismantles xenophobia and extreme nationalism. Your primary identity is not your local republic. Your primary, unshakable identity is a citizen of the universe, bound to every other human being by the shared hardware of rational thought. It demands a profound, empathetic duty to your fellow cosmic citizens, recognizing that beneath the arbitrary divisions of local geography, we are all inextricably linked by the divine spark of shared intelligence. Looking back across these 3 centuries, we witness the profound synthesis and shifting priorities of this living intellectual organism. It transformed entirely from a rigid, holistic, theoretical system defending itself against academic skeptics into a fluid, highly therapeutic way of life designed for the trenches of human suffering. We can see this evolution across its 3 core disciplines. In the early and transitional era under Antipater, logic was a defensive priority, physics was orthodox Chrysippus dogma, and ethics was bogged down in definitional debates. Moving into the middle era of Panaetius and Posidonius, logic integrated with hard science, physics embraced empirical geography and psychological dualism, and ethics shifted toward practical decorum and civic duty. Finally, in the Roman imperial era of Epictetus and Seneca, logic was largely marginalized as petty arguments. Physics became a tool for theological contemplation and emotional perspective, and ethics reigned supreme, placing absolute priority on therapeutic action and cosmic duty. But here's the thing: this evolution is precisely why these ideas survive today. They adapted. The system shed its obsession with abstract paradoxes and morphed into a resilient operating framework for the human mind. Actually, if you look closer, this ancient shift mirrors our own challenges today. As we navigate the overwhelming complexities of the AI era, drowning in data and algorithmic impressions, we don't need more abstract theories. We need therapeutic pragmatism. We need a mechanism of assent to protect our character, and a vision of the cosmopolis to remember our shared humanity. That concludes our exploration for today. Thank you for your time, and see you next time.